Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. We will be getting started in just a couple of minutes. It's 2 brief reminders before we begin. First, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Second, there will be question and answer following the discussion. With the wait for the microphone to you, state your name and affiliation before your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Winnie Stackelberg, Executive Vice President of External Affairs here at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. I'm pleased introducing today's panel for a number of reasons. Mostly it focuses on one of the great challenges America faces, how to ensure that the economy benefits all workers. Over recent decades, workers have lost power and received smaller share of the country's economic growth. Worse, too many workers struggle to afford even the basic living costs. As a candidate, President Trump claimed he would be pro-worker, but his actions have been the opposite. He has made it more difficult for workers to receive overtime pay and harder for them to join unions. He has made it easier for companies to misclassify employees as independent contractors with no rights and let government contractors that steal workers' wages off the hook. Even as his actions harm workers, he provides massive tax cuts for corporations. Put simply, Trump has broken promise after promise to workers. But mayors are keeping their promises. Mayors in cities across the country are responding to these challenges by advancing policies to raise pay, increase benefits, and build power for their residents through reforms that, for example, help to ensure that municipal spending creates jobs, gives workers excluded from federal bargaining laws a meaningful voice on the job, and create new worker-led systems for the delivery of essential benefits. Today, mayors from two different parts of the country with very different political traditions and legal structures will discuss solutions to improve working conditions and help build power for workers. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to thank everyone who helped make this event possible, particularly our Director of the American Worker Project, Carl Walter, and our Director for State and Local Government Affairs, Sherry. Now, I'm thrilled to welcome two dynamic leaders who are working hard to build power for working people in their cities and beyond. Jenny Durkin was elected mayor of Seattle, Washington in 2017, the first woman to lead the city in nearly a century. She is focused on making Seattle affordable and inclusive for all, such as through Seattle Promise Initiative, which helps ensure public high school students can access 2-3 years of college. She has been a national leader in ensuring Seattle creates new models for ensuring more security for workers, which we will hear more about today. Prior to becoming mayor, Durkin served as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Washington, becoming the first openly gay U.S. attorney in our country's history. LeVar Stoney was sworn in as the mayor of Richmond, Virginia in 2016. He is the youngest mayor ever elected to serve the city. A product of Virginia public schools, he grew up on free and reduced lunch and was the first in his family to earn a high school diploma. Prior to becoming mayor, he was the driving force. He was the first African-American secretary of the Commonwealth of Virginia, where he was the driving force behind transforming the process that restores civil and voting rights. Our moderator today is David Madeline, who is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress Action Fund and senior advisor to the American Work Project, which he leads our work to modernize America's labor laws to better support workers in the 21st century. Madeline is the author of the book Hollowed Out: Why the Economy Doesn't Work Without a Strong Middle Class. And I want to welcome all of you here, especially as we are in the midst of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I want to welcome all of the mayors who are in this room and thank you for all of the amazing work that you do every single day for your constituents. We're so grateful that the two of you in particular join us today for this important conversation, and please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
I am thrilled to be able to have this conversation with Mayor Stoney and Mayor Durkin. I'm going to start right off the question for both of you and really ask if you could sort of help set the stage for us today and explain a little bit about what's going on in your city and with sort of your history of what motivates you to want to address issues to improve conditions for workers, strengthen their power and ability to join unions. If you could walk us through that.
Well, first, I want to thank Kat for hosting this opportunity for us to talk about what's going on in our cities. You know, cities aren't always the same. There are unique approaches to different challenges that we have and all across this country. And as stated earlier, mayors are on the front line. And we have a responsibility to obviously to for the basics, the blocking and tackling of City Hall, filling the potholes and paving the streets, making sure trash is picked up, things of that nature. But also, I think we have another responsibility is for social growth as well, ensuring that we can create pathways of economic ability for our people. And so for me, the driving force behind my work is obviously my story. To being the first family to graduate from high school, I grew up in a home where my father did not have a high school education. He worked extremely hard, and what he wanted was to ensure that one day that I didn't have to work as hard as he did. And I think about the story of my father sitting my brother and I down and us asking him about his hands. And they were all calloused and bruised and blistered, and said, "Dad, like, you know, why are your hands like this?" He's like, "Son, I do hard work." You know, he worked in, you know, in construction and he worked in landscaping. And I remember one day he was, one time he was a butcher. By the time he died at age 49, he had worked at as a custodian at a local high school, and he made no more than $35,000 a year, and he was raising a family of 3. Very, very, very difficult. Very difficult to live on with a family of 3 making, $30,000 a year. But he made it work. And I think about not just the folks who work for city government, but I also think about those individuals who are working day to day, working paycheck to paycheck, week after week, who they're not asking for a handout. They're just asking for a hand up. And I think that our impact on people, it goes beyond just the workers as well. It's the children that we're raising too. If they are able to make a living wage, a wage that they can actually raise a family with, they're going to have even more opportunities for themselves. And so for me, it starts with looking at errors and I encounter in my city and think about my grandmother who was a laborer in people's homes most of life, and my father who was a hard worker as well. And so I make this very personal on how we go about investing in the people of our city.
So I have to echo and want to thank the mayor, and I want to thank CAP for not just having us here today, but for all the work you're doing to keep these issues alive and making sure that we have the best data possible. As mayors, it's really important. One of my favorite quotes that came out of the Kavanaugh hearings, which here you had this incredibly divisive hearing in the Senate. Not that ever happens. And then we had a number of men who approached Senator Flake. And I don't know if you saw that video, but they were he's trying to close the elevator. They're telling him what they think. And Mitch Landrieu, who was mayor of New Orleans, said, "I know that looked rough for a United States senator. But when you're mayor, that happens 7 times while you're buying milk." And it's true. We care because, number one, we have to care. We are not just the front lines of what's happening in America. Cities have become both the safety net and the laboratory for America. We are the first to see what works and what doesn't work. And Seattle sits in a situation where many mayors in America talk to me and they think we have so many great opportunities because we've had 140,000 people move to Seattle in just the last 7 years about. And we've created thousands of jobs. But as we are in this shifting economy, I believe we're in a time that is more disruptive than the Industrial Revolution was. And if we do not protect workers and what is happening with workers, we will lose not just the middle class, but we'll lose hope for anyone to move out of poverty. And so not only do I feel like it's important to care, I think that really the future of America depends on how do we treat workers today and worker rights tomorrow. We have seen one of the most fundamental shifts of the cost of supporting workers from corporations who paid wage and health care and sick time through hard work and shifting that to local governments. And with the rise of the gig economy, it is more and more important for local governments to stand up and say that all workers are going to have a place and to have fair wages.
Wow. It's
We jumped into it. Yes.
No, it's great. It's clear why we have these two on stage with us, and I'm thrilled to be able to do it. So let's get into right away what you're doing about these problems. I'm going to start with Mayor Durkin. Your Seattle and administration are really a national leader on so many different issues relating to whether it's enforcement or paid leave or scheduling. But I want to focus on two things in this first question. And if you talk a little bit about your efforts with public sector workers and unions, especially post-Janus, what you've been doing to strengthen workers' ability there, and with domestic workers who have been traditionally left out of so many basic protections for workers, and especially the Domestic Workers Standards Board, the innovative. And if you could talk about both of those.
That's great. So I think that cities can affect the field in two different ways. The first thing we have to do is make sure we treat our own workers correctly and that we are setting the example. And Washington State is a state that has a very strong libertarian, you would say, streak, and some very conservative groups who are on the forefront of assaults against public sector unions. They not only welcome the Janus decision, they have been promoting and trying to get within the state to erode the workers' rights and power. And so when Janus passed, in anticipating that, we all knew what was going to happen as we sound with our sector unions, who we bargained very hard against to make sure that we were protecting both our taxpayers and our workers, and said, let's look at the range of things that we know is going to be under assault so that we can get an even playing field. So we sat down and with them decided that we would give certain rights, like the ability to be, when people are hired into the city orientation, for them to make the presentation as to what the value is of the union and what they do. We also looked at the whole range of things that we know that they need to do their job, including bargaining in good faith. And having those kinds of working relationships with those unions, I think not only protects the members of those unions, it's better for our city. Every day, our city workers are showing up to work, doing everything from filling potholes to picking up garbage to you name it. and everyone relies on their service. We got to make sure we pay them well and treat them well. So we worked very hard and cooperatively with our own unions to say, what are those things we need to do to make sure that we can't have people erode the rights of people to have fair representation in the workplace. We also looked at, where are those sectors in our economy that there is a growing and burgeoning gig economy and people who don't have collective bargaining rights, who have been excluded from the workforce. And for us, one of those main areas was domestic workers. And you see them in and out of households, in yards, and like. And they are unrepresented, often in the shadows, often immigrants and refugees who have very little power in society. So we sat down and worked with both employers and the workers themselves, and were able to craft a domestic workers' bill of rights to give them not just an access to fair wages, rest breaks, and our Office of Labor Standards would enforce those rights. We're just in our first year, but it is there's nothing better, and I think the mayor agree with this, is seeing the faces of the people that you actually get to serve and making a difference in their lives. And hearing voices from these domestic workers who are working long hours, back-breaking work, and not knowing whether one day they'll be without a job because they can't do it anymore, the whole range of issues. So we're really working hard to protect those workers.
Very quick follow-up before I get on Mayor Stoney. So if you could talk a little bit more about the standards board, because I think one of the key things is that the workers themselves get to participate, and these are the types of workers that often have no little voice. So if you could just talk about a little bit about how you've structured that to give them a voice and some power in the decision-making process.
Thanks. Really good point, because not only with the rise of gig economy and unrepresented workers is the problem of just wages and benefits and hours, but it's also that if you don't have that collective bargaining power, you don't have a collective voice over what working conditions and the like would be. So when we set up our standards board, we wanted to make sure that the voice of employees was centered in what we were doing. Now, we also had employers there, but the employees themselves have to not only see themselves, we can't do our job right if we know what the reality of their work is. So we had to get that power. We're doing a similar thing for our, I know we're going to get to it. All right, sounds good.
Mayor Stoney, you operate, as Winnie mentioned, in a very, very different legal environment now and political tradition. And one of the biggest things is a lack of sort of home rule, the Dillon rule, which limits your ability to take on most number of pro-worker issues. Yet you still have been able to do a fair amount. I was wondering if you could walk us through some of the constraints you face and the ways you've been able to still promote worker interest despite the barriers you face.
You're right. We in a Dillon rule environment where we're not a home rule city, there are some limitations. There are some restrictions. I always say the Dillon rule is the granddaddy of all preemption laws across the country. I mean, they really have restricted the way cities can get involved in bettering the lives of those who work in our city, those who live in our city. However, I will say this before I get to I am elated by the new Democratic majority in Virginia, in the House of Delegates and in Virginia Senate as well, that I think it's my hope they start chipping away. I'm not asking for it to overturn the Dillon rule, but just some modifications so that cities can choose their own destiny. For us, though, using the bully pulpit and the position as mayor, where we've been able to champion a living wage, or even highlighting those places where folks are actually paying their employees a living wage, and we do that through our Office of Community Wealth Building. When you're a mayor, you kind of inherit programs and initiatives, and sometimes we want to put our own brand on our own initiatives. But I inherited this Office of Community Wealth Building, was one of the first of its kind in the United States of America, where we actually centralized a lot of our resources around how do we go about fighting poverty. And when I became mayor in 2017, the poverty rate in Richmond was 26%. Over the course of the last 3 years, we've knocked that down to about 21.8%. We are a growing city. We're not as big as Seattle yet, but we're continuing to grow. And we got the largest labor market in our city, and roughly a generation, and the lowest employment rate in our city in a generation of 2.9%. But still today, there are 3,000 or so individuals still looking for work. And all the time they've had an encounter with the criminal justice system. And so I believe that city government should play a role in hiring former offenders or returning citizens and bringing them in, because for a lot, particularly in the African community, the public sector jobs have been the pathway to the middle class. And I think it can still be that same vehicle today. And so we have to be even more intentional about how we go about hiring those individuals who may have a felony on their record. That's something that we've done. And my past history working in Secretary of the Commonwealth, I think that those workers are going to be important to progress as a community. Also, I walked into City Hall with employees who had not been paid given an increase in a decade. So we've had this robust recovery from the recession, and yet our employees, the public sector employees, still being paid the same wage they were being paid back in 2008. So I remember. And this is interesting when sometimes your employees will set you straight. I went to a big Department of Public Works lunch to celebrate the success of Public Works employees, and a guy knew my bio, sat me down because I'd given maybe like $1,000 bonus end of the year or $500 bonus, something of the sort, and he said to me, he said, "Now, what do you think if your father was on the other side of this, how he would feel?" And I was like, "Wow. This guy knows my bio, right?" And so over the course of 8 months, we were able to actually give a raise to our public workers, our city employees, a 4% increase over the last 18 months, which was significant, so significant that some of my employees actually retired after that one. It was like, "Mr. Mayor, I got the raise, and I'm out here." But some other policies they're looking at as well that we've actually implemented was, we were in a very inclusive workforce, I think. Over the course of a period of time, a human rights campaign came in, looked at the city of Richmond, saw that we were 42 out of 100 on how welcoming we were to the LGBTQ community. And we made some changes right away. But one of the most significant changes made were availing to our workforce health benefits for our transgender community, which was never done before in city government. A new lactation policy, providing rooms for lactation for our female workers, but also 8 weeks of parental paid leave as well, which was the most progressive paid leave policy amongst any local government in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So you add compensation also with these other benefits as well. We've been able to be the model, I think, for all the whether the public sector or in the private sector in our city. And I'm glad that even state government followed us on the paid parental leave front.
Can I just follow up on something
please.
he said? You asked why we do this. Did you say 20% poverty rate?
Yeah, 21%. Yep.
That's why we're here. I mean, in every city in America, we see this phenomenon. In Seattle, we see it, not that level. But with this shifting economy, we have got to make sure that people can get ahead in this country, and that people have the right to a living wage, and that we really are looking out for workers and work power, because without that, we can't nudge that. I was just in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I was able to chair our task force on the future of work. And looking at what happened in America, we're in a record unemployment time, around 3 to 4%, depending what part of the country it is. We're seeing shareholder values increase. They've never increased before. But what we're not seeing is wages and benefits grow anywhere. They've been flat, can barely be nudged behind. So as it's getting more expensive to live in every city and town in America, wages have not kept up, benefits have not kept up. And those people who aren't considered employees fall further behind, because if they get sick and lose their job, they don't have any cushion. And we've seen the rise in homelessness, and every city that has prosperity sees that edge of it. So as mayors, we have to do something about it. We need a better partner in the federal government.
And can I add to that as well? I just, because you are 100% correct, Mayor, that, our cities are becoming the most desirable places to live now. Right, we're undergoing one of the greatest migration patterns now. It was white flight back in the 70s, 60s. Folks fled the urban centers, and guess what? Now they're all moving back, And now all of our area, all of our cities are becoming very, very desirable. We're seeing a lot of growth, but with that, you see a lot of home price starting to rise as well. But the interesting thing is, as home prices are rising, rents are rising, but the wages aren't rising. So I got a number of residents now who are becoming cost burdened. You know, the number of households in my city where they're spending 50% of their income on housing, or even 30% of their income housing. That leads to high eviction rates, which Richmond, we had an 11.4% eviction rate, the second highest in the United States of America. And you wonder, like, why is this happening? It's because the workers out there, folks who are working the hardest, they're not getting paid a living wage to raise their families. And so it's an impact that it ripples throughout the system. And when you talk about life in general, you know, like people say, well, life happens a whole lot differently for poor people. That's just the truth. And then as you said, Mayor, you know, miss your car breaks down, you get a flat, a child gets sick, and you don't make a lot of money. As a person who's lived through that, it changes. It can be devastating for a family. But if there's a safety net there, right? And a safety net there for me is not just, we shouldn't just program people to death, but we at least give them a good job so they can live a high quality of life. And you want those jobs in your city. I want to be a great place for business, right? Virginia prides itself as being one of the best places for business in the United States of America. But also, how about we be one of the best places for workers as well? And I think the two aren't I mean, these are polar opposites. You can be a place for business that's attractive to businesses and corporations, but also, let's say you treat your workers well, too.
Well said. Actually, both have set up my next question quite well. I wanted to ask Mayor Durkin, you highlighted this transformation in the economy and the sort of polarizing effects that it has on some folks, especially corporations at the very top, doing well, and workers caught in the transition as work has been disrupted and changed, its nature being very different, not doing so well. Sort of the drivers at Uber and Lyft are sort of seen as the forefront of this, often not categorized as employees with few rights and limited ability to get good wages. You've taken a very, very interesting approach to this issue. You've taken several, but let's talk about your most recent approach to this. If you could talk a little bit sort of about how you are taking, in process of ensuring there's a standardization for wages, but as well as a process for the workers to have a voice in the system, as well as to address, at the same time, tackling some of this housing issues we was talking about. So you have a very sort of integrated system. And as you talk about how it works, you could also give some lessons in the politics here as well, because you're dealing, as Mayor Stoney said, we want to be pro-business as well as pro-worker, and sort of how you deal with the politics of some businesses not appreciating what you're trying to do.
So we in Seattle, it's interesting because we are, we have cities in Washington State have a significant amount of local power, but some areas we don't. So unlike California, looking at our Uber and Lyft drivers, we couldn't change classification. We couldn't say that they become workers. That's up at the state level. So we knew that we had this whole group of workers who were driving incredible numbers of hours. And if you calculated what their wages were, when you took the hours they were in the car, as well as the expenses they paid themselves to maintain the car, they were traveling at substandard hours. We also took in a growth city where we have a big transportation, issues because we've had so many people there in such a short period of time. And in certain parts of our city, mostly where our tech companies are, at any given part of the day, studies we've done suggest anywhere from 30 to 50% of the cars who were circling were Uber and Lyft. So we said, how do we make sure that we're, one, good for climate, but also how do we make sure that those gig economy workers, they lose that job, if they get thrown off the platform, that we as the city aren't becoming a safety net, providing all those things that they need, housing, services, and the like. So it's a very complicated issue on how you compensate those drivers and what phases. And so we spent a great deal of time working with Teamsters who represented some of them, other worker group that represented a group of them, talking to the companies, and we finally proposed a bill that does a number of things. Number one, it's going to give a minimum wage to the drivers. And it's going to look at what are those times they're in a car that can fairly be assigned to the ride they're giving that benefits the company. So there's the circling the block or sitting at the sidewalk somewhere they're just waiting where they may have multiple platforms open. That then there's the second phase, which has actually been called to a ride. And then there's the third one, they've got the person in the vehicle. They now get paid the time they have people actually in the car. We know that going to the ride, it benefits the companies. Because if you open one of those platforms, you're going to use it because you see all those cars on there and you think, oh, it's only going to take me 5 seconds. So we're doing that, plus in expenses to make sure that the costs that they use for fuel, upkeep, and the like get reimbursed fairly. But we also, rather than just impose it because it's complicated, we pass a law requiring and mandating minimum wage and expenses. We're having a study that everyone gets to bring their data to the table. So we ask the companies to bring their data to the table because it's hard to get. But the second thing we're doing is I heard time and time, and I spent a lot of times listening to these drivers. And they can get kicked off the platform by the companies for reasons they have no way to challenge. One person talked about how she was sitting at a stoplight with a person in her car. The driver in front of her, obviously intoxicated, backs up, hits her car, and then flees. She calls 911, reports it. Police come, take her report. Because her name's in a report, she gets kicked off because they thought she was the drunk driver. And she had no way to challenge it. So we've also created a dispute resolution center that will be cheaper for the drivers to go to, that they can actually challenge and have a mediator look at those kinds of disputes and get assistance from someone. Many of our drivers are immigrants and refugees whose primary language is not English. I think we'll have the companies come to the table because I hope persuaded them why that's better for them as well. But we've got to make sure that, that when I believe we've misclassified way too many people as not being employees. And maybe we can't change that at a local level, but what we can do is make sure that if they are there, they're going to get paid fairly and have adequate rights. Oh, and the last part you were asking about. So the other thing we did is, our huge problem is affordable housing. It drives so many of the challenges we have. And one thing we want to make sure is that work can actually work in Seattle and and live in Seattle. And right now, too many of our workers have been pushed out, particularly in our communities of color. Average rents now are about $1,800 a month for a small one-bedroom. The average price of the house is around $750,000. It's out of reach, right? I know, right? And so we also said, look, we're going to also tack on another 50-cent fee for every ride and use that money for affordable housing and public transportation. And so eventually, once we get that money, we want to make sure that those workers can work here, and we want to make sure our public transportation infrastructure is equitable.
So, yeah, it's impressive and innovative, and I think wanted to highlight it as a model for the rest of the country to think about. Mayor Stoney, you mentioned this, we have a new Virginia legislature, which has the potential to potentially directly affect workers, but also perhaps give you more rights and abilities to address issues. You mentioned the idea of what they could do, but I'm wondering if you could be a little bit more specific and talk about the kinds of things you would like them to do to help you, and then what you would like to do going forward, kinds of things you will then be able to do.
When I think about, and here's the truth. The history of Virginia, the history of Richmond is 3 parts, and it's good, bad, and ugly, right? And we have been the model, unfortunately, for exclusion. And I think we are a more competitive state, a more competitive city, when we're the model for inclusion. And that means we have to be very, very intentional, working with our state partners and getting discrimination and disenfranchisement out of the Virginia Constitution, out of the Virginia Code. And it's not going to happen overnight. One General Assembly session is going to take some time. But these sort of policies and laws are essentially this is the foot on the neck for a lot of the marginalized who are living in the urban areas of Virginia, but also who are living in rural areas of Virginia as well. Some of those policies I think about, particularly for urban centers like Richmond, is the work that my friends in the General Assembly are working on non-discrimination policies when it comes to the LGBT rights as well. The fact that you can be turned away still in Virginia from a home or from a job because of who you choose to love is unbelievable. Unbelievable. But that is currently the law on the books in Virginia, and I think at the end of this year, by the end of March, that will be gone. Also, when it comes to housing policies, the fact that property owners, landowners can turn away people because of having a voucher, right? Your source of income. That right there keeps those who've been marginalized in the worst quality properties across your city, right? If only, let's say, 5 properties actually accept vouchers that you're receiving from the federal government, and you're only that's reconcentrating poverty in certain cities. We got a great law that my good friend, who's a delegate for the city of Richmond, Jeff Bourne, is carrying, that I think will end that policy and implement some more inclusive housing policies as well. These are the sort of pieces of legislation I think that allow for cities to become not just a desirable place for one kind of person, right, but for more people, right? As more and more people flood into cities, how can we continue to keep our character, whether it's African Americans and Latinos living amongst all our new residents who are moving into our city as well. So very, very excited. Obviously, when the Republicans were in charge, I was an aggressive voice. I'm going to continue being an aggressive voice, even with the Democrats as well, because this has to come with an expectation. Also, I had one more thing, because we got the pillars of our mission as One Richmond is investing in public transportation, more affordable housing, public education, and obviously we got to continue to create jobs and train the future workers. Public transportation, the ability for your residents to get around your city, that's one thing, right? We've made some enhancements there, investing in public transportation. We launched a new bus rapid transit system in the city. But that's within the city limits. The one thing you didn't point out earlier, though, is not just the Dillon rule, but in Virginia, we have independent cities. That means the cities are independent of the county. So unlike some of these, what I call New South cities in like Nashville, Atlanta, Louisville, you name it, these are cities where the county and these are one, right? They're combined governments. In Virginia, the cities are on their own, the counties are on their own. And since we also cannot annex either, we are landlocked. But also our residents are landlocked because you have counties that say, you know what, we don't want public transportation. And so basically the buses go to the border and turn around. When, as we know, there's a lot of jobs outside the city. So they want to get around the city in a reliable way, right, in a dependable way. They really want to get to their job, right? So they want to be on the east end of Richmond and can get to the west end of Henrico. That opens up just wealth of opportunity for residents so they can actually not only lift themselves, but also lift their families up as well.
Yeah, you have a big hole to dig out from, but that's also one of the reasons I really wanted you here, is this sort of the worst American government that's been forced upon you, and yet you are able to do a fair amount even with all these constraints. The other thing that I think, just my last question for both of you, I'll have one last question for both of you, but following on sort of the constraints, if you could talk a little bit about, and you were trying to raise wages for your public sector workers, you also had to ensure that you raise revenue, and if you could talk a little about that connection, because I think it's one of the key ways that you have some power, but also that there are a lot of constraints on you.
Well, I think Mayor would agree that as chief executive of your city and of your government, unlike my friends I got friends who are legislators as well, but we got to make decisions, right? We got to be problem solvers and not problem seekers. And here's the thing: we all have them in our different cities. There are those who are problem seekers who will call out all the challenges that your city may have, but then when it comes to actually providing a solution, where are they? Right? Because we can have all the core values, we can have all these values, but if you're unable to fund your values, then all it is just rhetoric, right? And in local government, we have to fund our values. And yes, you're right. I wanted to invest in my workers. I wanted to give them that 4% increase in their salaries, and that costs money, right? I wanted the city to have better roads. That costs money. I want to be better schools. That costs money. So, yes, 3 years I've attempted to raise 3 taxes: taxes on meals, taxes on cigarettes and tobacco sold in the city, and all real estate taxes, which is the biggest source of revenue for Virginia cities, because we can't tax income. I don't know if you guys can do that as well, but we can't tax income, and so the biggest source of revenue is real estate. And so in my previous budget, I reckoned a 9-cent increase on the real estate taxes, going back to pre-recession eras, because what I heard from this, what they want better roads, they want better schools, they want just better infrastructure. And I said, well, there's going to take the workers, city workers will be doing a lot of this work, and I just they are owed fair share. Do this work, since it's been a decade since they actually had received an increase. Now, I didn't get the real estate tax part through. I did get the 2 other ones through. And we were able to find the dollars necessary through growth in the city to fund that increase. But I think that's the difference between us, mayors, and legislators. We got, and also compared to the federal government, right? They can just keep on borrowing, and the debt can run. We have to send a balanced budget. We have to have a balanced budget each and every year. And a lot of places you don't have to do that, but we do. And I believe you gotta be fearless and undeterred, right? People say, are you afraid of not being reelected because you raised tax? No. Why? Because I'm going to tell folks why I did what I did. And I think that's the key to, I don't only political advice out here, but the key is to tell folks why you do what you do. And once you explain why you did it, then everything else, don't worry about it. As long as you're doing the right thing. You got to be bold. I mean, these are real significant challenges. And either we can talk about the problems or we're going to actually go about fixing the problems.
Thank you. And Mayor Durkin, last question for you. Speaking of being bold, I've highlighted already several of the bold policies you're doing, but there are many others from the sort of enforcement system you've been working on, especially for workplace standards, paid sick and scheduling. Wondering if you just want to highlight any one of those or all of those, and so what you would want to say to them, highlight that other people you think would be interested in knowing and being aware of, and how you think other mayors could, if there's anything other mayors could learn from.
So I think that's a great question. I listened to my friend here, and I had the chance early in my career to work for a brief period of time for state government. And I can remember asking him, I said, what are the things you regret? What are the actions you've taken? And he said, I don't really regret a single action I've taken. What I regret are things I didn't do. And I think we feel that urgently as mayors, because we see it every day in our communities when we're out on all the things we need to fix. And so I would say number one to mayors is really listen to people. Make your solutions community-based. Listen to the people and what they need, because they will help guide you. The second is look, it's tough on resources. City of Seattle, in some ways, one of the most prosperous cities in America. But our taxation system is backwards. We have no income tax in our state at all. The only taxes that we have basically sales tax and a property tax. We also have a B&O tax, but it's circumscribed to the state. So every time we want to do one of these programs, we've got to raise regressive taxes. We got to tell the people that are, paying their food that you're going to put a sales tax on them. So more and more the people earn less, are disproportionately paying more of their fees to government. So be really cognizant, I think, of where you're getting resources and get buy-in. Give an example that we didn't talk about. One of the other times I was here is one of the first things I did when I came in is we went to the people on a ballot measure to raise property taxes, to pay for 2 years free college for every Seattle public school student, and almost double the number of pre slots we had. And the voters voted for it by 70%. And that's because they saw that that is our future, that if we treat our youth and our kids right, that means everyone wants the next generation to do better than theirs. And we're in this time that's not true. And so I think if you make the case and build that dream for people, you're much more likely to get them to opt in.
Wonderful. We have a few last minutes for questions from the audience, and I want to give a chance if there are questions from the audience. If you could raise your hand and identify yourself, there'll be a microphone coming around. Just a second.
My name is Christine Sylvia DeGennaro from the AFL-CIO, and I have a two-part question for Mayor Durkin. Seattle is one of the cities that's contending for the 2026 World Cup. And this set of games, the 2026 World Cup, is supposed to be the first one to include human rights standards and in the planning and the implementation of the games. Seattle, in all likelihood, has the strongest human rights standards of all of the cities that are competing. So that should advantage the city to be selected to host the games. United 2026 bid made robust commitments, including promising to consider cities' human rights track records when making decisions about things. So what I was wondering if human and labor rights have been something that the bid committee has discussed with the city leadership. Then second, what your vision would be for incorporating labor and other human rights in the city's hosting bid.
That's a great question. So FIFA World Cup to America, shared between America and Mexico. I'm very hopeful that Seattle will be one of the host cities because I think it does a lot of what you said. Number one, it's going to showcase our great city, and we just won the MLS trophy. But human rights component, but we saw what happened when Qatar got the last FIFA World Cup and what the standards that weren't followed. And I think coming to America is a really good way to show both FIFA and the world that you can have strong human rights and worker right protections and put on the best games anywhere. And so the bid committees will be very much, if Seattle gets chosen, and we're in conversations with U.S. Soccer and everyone, I think you'll see a unified front on behalf of all cities to make sure that when we have it in the United States, we can really showcase to the world that America can do it right.
Great.
Thank you for that question.
Excited as a soccer fan and a human rights and labor rights fan. I'm looking forward to it.
Also a fan of Seattle, I imagine. Well, right?
That's right. Yeah.
First, although DC United was for sure from here. But,
How about those Sounders?
next question, I have one there, and then one up front.
My name is Jeff Gordon for the mayor from Seattle. You were going to raise taxes 50 cents, I think, or something that was going to go for housing or affordable housing, and I just wondered how you were going to figure that out for what vouchers or building housing or how you were
So
going to...
great question. So the 50 cents will be on every ride. It'll be split between affordable housing and a transportation infrastructure. We're going to build a streetcar in downtown Seattle that's connected. So there'll be greater mobility. And on the housing, we're very fortunate because my predecessors, going back a couple different mayorships, created we put to the voters again, Seattle taxes itself for things it believes in, and we created a housing levy. And so we have an Office of Housing that has a very robust way to build affordable housing. Been fortunate to announce 3 rounds of investments, and in the 3 years that I've done that, we invested about $250 million of city money, but we've been able to leverage it with our partners so that we'll have $1.5 billion new affordable housing. So we will put that money to work in that fund in the same model.
Great. And then there was a question up front.
Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth Kennedy from Loyola University, Maryland. I'm actually a Seattle resident, so.
Yay.
I wanted to ask you both about how city government tackled the racial wage gap. So we heard from Mayor Stoney about hiring re-entering citizens in city government, and I'm curious for both of you, what are some specific things that city governments can do to incentivize the private sector to deconstruct racialized barriers in the workplace?
So, really, question. I think you've got to do it on at least 3 levels. Number one, mayors have the unique ability to have bully pulpit, and if we make ending systemic racism a stated goal of our city, and then we model it by our own hiring, we will have much more authority when we go to talk about why that's the right thing to do. I think first we have to do it bully pulpit, and second we have to do it from our own internal policies. The third is I think that we have to be conscious of the various levels of employment, how we get that right. And I think one of the things that we know contributes so greatly to the wage gap is the opportunity gap at every stage of the system. You know, systemic racism cooked in the books in so many levels. So, for example, we're really focused. It's one reason why, even though I don't control schools as mayor in the city of Seattle, there's a separate entity, that we invested huge amounts of money, get good preschool, and then make it affordable, free, and place those preschools in those communities of color so that those families knew the kids could show up to school ready to learn. And then when we invested money, close that learning gap in the schools themselves so the kid get ready to go to the 2 years free college that we're going to give them. And now with every one of major employers and labor unions, we piloted a program. So we took 30 of those students to give them internships while they're in the free college. What kind of job would you want? What do you want to be? How do you try it? And then we connect them with those jobs in our economy. If we can do that, scale that, I think that long-term systemically is going to be the best way to close that gap.
And I will just add, I think, you know, when you got this is locating in your city, and a lot of times, sometimes either want to they want to buy city land, or they need zoning as well. And I think that's where your values, I think, are on play there as well. Whether it's investing, ensuring that we close the gap between people of color and the majority, or also in terms of investment in minority business as well, so people actually can create their own wealth too. We can drive some of those values, I think, through land use and through zoning too, because people want to be in people want to be in Richmond, people want to be in Seattle, but we want to make sure that when we think of corporate citizenship, it can't just be writing checks sometimes. It's also how you treat your people too.
I just want to add another thing to that is, look, the wage gap is real, both by gender and race. And part of the problem in our shift to the economy is disproportionately that women and people of color have been left out of the new economy. And so we have to build very intentional pathways in the economy, or everything will get even more exacerbated.
And I have one last question. I thought I saw a hand, but maybe I didn't. But that's great, because we are out of time. But so that gives me the opportunity to give mayors, if they want to make any last closing comments. I saw you, Mayor Stoney, about to pull up your microphone, but if you don't, that's fine.
No, I'm good. I think we have an conversation.
Then if we could join me in...
Say one thing. One of the best things about mayors and coming to this conference is meeting and talking to other mayors. I'm leaving here inspired. You know, Richmond is this city that is 2 hours away from our nation's capital by train. They have 20% poverty in America. That's not right. And here you have this guy who could have done a lot of things, and he says, I'm going to tackle it. That's what mayors are about. It's the local problem, saying the government work for you. I just gotta my hat off to you. I mean, I leave here inspired by my fellow mayor.
Didn't I ask her to say? She said that on her own. Thank you. I want to come to Seattle, or you can come to Richmond anytime.
There we go.
All right.
And if it was easy, be out.
We could tackle these challenges together.
Right. Well, with that, please just join me in thanking Stone Durkin for their great conversation.